Welcome, everyone, to the Information's TITV. My name is Akash Pasricha. It is Tuesday, April 21st. We are doing a special show with our sponsor, Adobe. We are here at the Adobe Summit in Las Vegas at the Venetian Resort. There are some big announcements happening here. Adobe is launching new AI products for marketers. It is expanding its partnerships with big names like Nvidia, Microsoft, Anthropic, and more. Today on the show, we're speaking with Adobe executives about those announcements. We'll talk about their AI strategy at large. We're also going to try to understand how their customers are using the technology. But first up, I want to throw it over to Anita Ramaswamy in our San Francisco bureau to take a look at some of the big stories dominating today's news. Anita, over to you.
Thanks, Akash. Apple's Tim Cook is stepping down as CEO come September, and John Ternus, the company's current SVP of hardware engineering, will take over. Tim Cook will transition to executive chairman. Here to comment is Gil Luria, managing director and head of technology research at D.A. Davidson. Gil, great to have you on the show.
Good to see you, Anita.
Really excited to get into this. We were expecting this to happen for a while, but we just didn't know when. What do you make of the timing?
Tim Cook wanted to leave on top, and he can probably feel like he's doing that now. The stock's at all-time highs. It performed really well recently, and we're in the midst of a very big iPhone upgrade cycle, the biggest one we've had in 4 or 5 years. So Tim Cook gets to leave the company in good shape, in stable condition. He's the one that took the company over from Steve Jobs. He hasn't innovated a lot, but he has delivered tremendous growth, profitable growth, tremendous returns to the shareholders. And that's really what he was enlisted to do. And now we're on to the next phase. And based on this hire, it looks like the board decided that the next phase is going to be hardware centric. They could have promoted Craig Federighi from the software side. They did not. They promoted John Ternus, which means that the next phase of evolution, really 5, 10, 15 years, is still going to be more about hardware than it is going to be about software.
You know, Gil, it's been a while that Tim Cook has been at the helm of Apple. He took over in 2011, which is, really a long time ago, longer than it seems like it's been. And I'm just wondering if you could dig a little bit more into some of the important numbers and metrics that investors looked at to sort of support your thesis here about his biggest achievements.
Yeah, I mean, the stock has multiplied itself several times over since then. And again, without tremendous innovation, the iPhone isn't that different than it was in 2011. It's more capable. The Mac isn't that different. It's more capable. They've added things like Watch and the AirPods, but those have been fairly incremental additions. What they've really done is continue to execute on growing the business at a relatively stable pace across those hardware businesses, getting a service business that's the fastest growing business, and maintaining that leadership on the premium portion of the market. Apple really has a control of that market for the handsets and for computers, which also means that they have most of the profits in the hardware market, in the handset and computer markets, which are two of the biggest markets there are, right? The only market that's bigger is automobiles. And they decided not to get into that. They've maintained an ecosystem, and they've developed their ecosystem to a point where when a consumer wraps themselves or wraps around themselves all these products, the Mac and the iPhone, the iPad and the AirPods and the Apple TV, they get very entrenched in the ecosystem. The relationship becomes very sticky. And then Apple has been able to sell services around that, subscriptions, et cetera. And so that's driven very consistent growth throughout that 15-year tenure, which again is translated to the stock multiplying several times over since then. The company has been very diligent and disciplined about expanding margins. Recently, it's become very good about buying back stock, paying dividend. And so the stewardship has been very consistent, which has created really great returns for investors in that time frame.
That makes a lot of sense. It sounds like, things have gone pretty well from a stock price perspective under Tim Cook's tenure. But I guess I'm wondering, going into this, what are the biggest challenges that John Ternus is going to face when he takes the helm?
That whenever a CEO leaves on top, as Tim Cook is doing, you have to worry a little bit about what happens after the top. So in this case, again, we had 4 years with very little iPhone upgrades, or a very muted iPhone upgrade cycle, and now we're going through a major iPhone upgrade cycle, double-digit growth in iPhone sales, which means that if there isn't enough innovation heading into the end of this year, next year we may actually see iPhone sales decline. Now, they do have innovation in the pipeline, specifically a folding phone and major enhancements to Siri. But if those don't materialize, or if those aren't compelling enough, then John Ternus may be walking into a situation where Apple's sales actually decline next year. So that's the hazard, that he has to execute on making the hardware and software value proposition a lot better at WWDC in June, at the September event, and therefore for the next holiday season, in order for Apple to maintain growth into next year. The stock is more expensive than any of the other mega caps, so they better continue to grow. Investors will have very little patience for a new CEO if they see a decline in revenue next year.
Well, that really begs the question. I mean, do investors think that Ternus is the right guy for the job? Is he someone who can bring that innovation and really reaccelerate growth at Apple?
Well, there have been two perspectives for investors. One was Apple needs to be far more focused on the software later, the AI applications. And then the other one was that Apple should stick to what it's worked so far, which is that it's been delivering the hardware platforms and wrapping software and services around that. So either way, you would have had half of investors disappointed. But realistically speaking, it's not a surprise. He's been very prominent. Really, he was one of the top two candidates with Craig Federighi. And so investors, you can see from the fairly muted reaction today, are okay with this. And really we'll just have to patiently see how Mr. Ternus executes. And again, he doesn't have a lot of time to rest on any laurels. The execution has to happen in the balance of this year for Apple to stay on a positive growth trajectory. So investors will wait and see how he performs over the next several months.
Yeah, and I suppose we'll have to see which camp of investors ended up being right about the hardware versus software focus, which should be really interesting. But
That's right.
Gil, on a separate note, I did want to go to our next topic here, which is on Amazon. Amazon announced it's investing up to $25 billion in Anthropic, and that deal's on top of the $8 billion that Amazon had already invested in Anthropic. What do you make of that news?
Yeah, so if you go back 3 months, Amazon was actually not in a great position. AWS, which had been the market leader for a very long time in cloud services, they invented cloud services, was starting to lose shares significantly to Microsoft Azure and Google Cloud. Let me give you some numbers. Amazon Web Services grew 24%. Uh, Microsoft Azure 39%, Google Cloud 48%, which is to say Microsoft and Google were gaining significant share at an era where that matters a lot, in the era of delivering AI compute. Amazon decided to take this seriously and has been very aggressive since then. They increased their capex. They put $50 billion into OpenAI's most recent round, and now they're putting another 25 into Anthropic. So the good news is Amazon's being aggressive and proactive. The not as good news is they would have probably not gotten a lot of OpenAI and Anthropic volumes if they hadn't been doing this. So OpenAI would have continued to just go to Microsoft and Oracle, and Anthropic would have probably shifted more of their volume to Google. But Amazon is now being very aggressive, making this investment in order to secure those compute volumes from those two, from OpenAI and Anthropic. So it's a good thing they're being aggressive. The reason they had to be aggressive, maybe not so great.
I'm curious, that you had mentioned that $50 billion that Amazon also invested in OpenAI, and I'm really glad that you brought that up. Why is the company funding essentially two competitors?
Well, right now we're in this mode where all these large participants want to spread their bets across the whole plane of competition. So that's true for Nvidia, it's true for Microsoft, it's true for Google, and it's true for Amazon. They want to have exposure to all the different types of chips. They want to have exposure to the two main frontier models. They're all invested across the board, and now they all want to see who succeeds, and they'll double their bets on whoever is successful here. But part of it is that we just can't build compute capacity fast enough. The frontier model race is still early stages. Let's not forget, it's not just Anthropic and OpenAI in this competition. It's also Google Gemini, it's also Meta, and it's also Elon. So the competition, and not to mention the Chinese, they're very nimble and are doing a lot more with a lot less. And so all these companies, especially those Microsoft, Amazon, and Google, have to spread their bets in order to make sure they have exposure to the best frontier model when one emerges. And as well as, let's not forget, they're all investing in Nvidia chips and Broadcom chips and AMD chips, and now there's more investment in CPUs and in optical and in memory. So everybody's investing across the board to make sure they're not missing out on whoever emerges as a winner in any one of these categories.
So this new deal, Gil, Anthropic said it was committing to spend over $100 billion in the next 10 years on AWS. So there is a little bit of reciprocity and sort of the structure. Does that stack up differently from OpenAI's deal? Can you remind us what the terms of that deal were?
Yeah, OpenAI also had to commit $100 billion of incremental compute capacity to Amazon in order to secure that investment. And that's, I mean, you used the word reciprocal. I think that's the polite for saying circular, right? All these companies, Nvidia, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Meta, all making these investments into their customers in order to secure revenue streams going forward. Again, that's worth noting. It's okay as long as everybody's successful, but it's worth noting that some of this isn't organic activity. It's not that OpenAI chose to use Amazon Web Services, they didn't. It's not that Anthropic chose to use Amazon Web Services, they didn't. They just have very big investments, and so that's where they're going with their to use that investment to buy compute, which, as we know, they're both running very low on, and they need all the compute they can get.
Do you have a sense of why Amazon needs this help? I mean, it sounds like they are still growing at 20% plus growth rate and, seeing at least some rapid expansion.
Well, Microsoft was growing 39%, and they were supply constrained. Google Cloud 48%, and so within a year or two, Microsoft Azure would have taken over Amazon as the biggest cloud, and Amazon was not going to let that happen. That's why they had to make these investments. That's why they're being so aggressive, because Amazon Web Services was falling behind in the race to provide AI compute. And these two very large investments should help them correct course. A lot of their growth right now, up until now, has been from Anthropic. Originally, this isn't their first investment in Anthropic. They actually invested early. They already had a stake in Anthropic, which is why Anthropic was using Amazon Compute to begin with, and now they're securing a lot more of that. So Amazon had to do this, otherwise they would have been lapped by Microsoft Azure.
Well, I'm sure this is a race we'll both be following very closely and we'll have more conversations about. Thank you so much, Gil, for coming on today. That is
Thank
Gil
you.
Luria from D.A. Davidson. The Information published exclusive reporting about Elon Musk's stake in SpaceX. My colleagues Valita Pao and Corey Weinberg broke the story. They join me now to share what they know. Valita, great to have you on. Corey, it's good to have you here too. I want to start by asking Valita a question. What did you learn in your reporting for the story?
So we're in the final few weeks ahead of the SpaceX IPO that will come sometimes in mid-June, and we just got new details about the blockbuster IPO. The key things to take away from a report last night is that Elon Musk increased his stake in SpaceX last year and brought bought $1.4 billion of stock from current and former employees. The documents also show us like a new plan to award Musk with tens of millions of shares tied to SpaceX market cap and also company performance milestone. And the market cap can go up as high as 6.6 trillion. Musk get shares vested that way. There's also new details about how Musk plan to handle corporate governance and dealing with shareholders. So there's a lot there.
So I'm wondering, Valita, what valuation did Elon Musk buy these shares at when he did his purchase?
We do not know exactly when he buy those shares, but then SpaceX does two tenders like year. We know in the summer it's around 400 billions, and in December doubled to 800 billions in valuations. So Elon Musk probably booked a quick paper gain on those shares already, because in February this year he merged his AI company XAI with SpaceX and pushed the valuation to $1.25 trillion. And now SpaceX is targeting at least a $1.5 trillion valuation in the IPO, though it's not being decided yet. So we don't know, but probably it has gains on the shares already.
Well, separately from that purchase, you also wrote in your story, Valita, about a new stock award plan. What did you learn there?
So it's very similar to kind of the ambitious goals what Tesla has set out for Elon Musk. For example, like with Tesla shareholders, Elon Musk can get huge payouts if he increased Tesla market caps from around $1.4 trillion to more than $8.5 trillion and tied to these robots goes. And in the SpaceX plans, they have a similar ones. They approved one last month that would give Musk, 60 million more shares if the company market cap jumps from 1.1 trillion to as high as $6.6 trillion. And the stock will vest as SpaceX increases its market cap every $500 billion. That was also contingent on whether the company can build enough like space data centers, which is a big focus for Musk. And if he can deliver 100 terawatts of compute per year. My colleague will have more about like how feasible that is in a second, but that's the latest on the plans that SpaceX has for Musk. And they already have kind of ambitious goals for Musk in January. If, he could hit stock price targets and establish like a Mars colony with at least 1 million inhabitants. So the new orbital data centers is like a new added focus for SpaceX and for Elon Musk.
I mean, that's really interesting that it's not only tied to a market cap threshold, but also this sort of amorphous, maybe a bit quirky goal about data centers in space. Corey, can you just flesh that out a little bit more? I mean, is that feasible? Is that something that you think will happen? Will the shares ever vest?
The fact that the mega grand goal includes shooting up more sort of compute capacity than the entire United States can sort of generate at its peak indicates that these are indeed very much moonshot goals as they are intended to be. To me, what was most interesting is it directly indicates to investors that this IPO is going to be very much about this pretty new idea of orbital data centers. And the earlier award that SpaceX's board had issued to Musk with some of these milestone goals had been tied to SpaceX getting 1 million people to Mars. The new additional award on top of that is about data centers in space, and to me, that sort of sequence tells us everything we need to know about what this IPO is going to be about.
Sounds to me like you're saying this could take a while if it happens at all.
Well, yeah, I mean, 1000%. And SpaceX also lays out in its list of risk factors in the prospectus that these efforts are in their earliest stages, and I think the IPO is going to be a lot about sort of asking investors to dream the dream. So
I mean, Corey, when I was reading your story, another thing that I found really interesting was this idea that SpaceX is looking to do a dual class share structure in their IPO. I know this has been something that other tech companies have considered or even gone forward with and has been a little controversial among investors. What is this going to mean for Elon Musk's ownership stake in SpaceX?
It means he can sell down a stake over time if he chooses to and still retain sort of a grip on the company, essentially. We don't know exactly what his ownership stake is. To be clear, we'll hopefully we'll learn that in a few weeks, if not sooner. But generally, with these dual class share structures, which, as you noted, are very common, it essentially allows the CEO to maintain control even if they start selling down their stake.
And do you think that that is something that will invite controversy from investors? I mean, have you sort of heard how people are thinking through that?
To be honest, I don't. Not that specific sort of provision, because I think everyone knows if you're investing in this IPO, then you're sort of giving over the keys to Musk. What could be interesting, and we noted this in our story as well, is the language in the document, particularly the risk factor section, does make clear that shareholders may not be able to pursue certain legal claims against the company because of a requirement for mandatory arbitration, which it seems to us to be an effort for Musk to avoid the kind of large shareholder lawsuits that he's faced in Delaware from his leadership of Tesla. And this will be kind of an interesting new test to see if shareholders are sort of resistant to sort of that language being enshrined in an S1.
Well, so that anti-arbitration language, it's a pretty new thing, right?
Yeah, we've just been kind of trying to get our heads wrapped around it, but the SEC essentially, from what we understand, used to not look too kindly on these clauses when companies would put this in their registration statements, including IPO prospectuses. Under the new sort of SEC during this Trump administration, they've sort of taken a sort of less hands-on approach and sort of trying to tamp this behavior down, which essentially has given the green light to SpaceX to include such language.
Got it. Well, I suppose for Musk, the last thing that he needs is another shareholder lawsuit or potential lawsuit on his hands. Thank you so much for coming on. It was really great having you on the show. That is our deals reporter, Valita Pao, and our deputy bureau chief of finance, Corey Weinberg. I'm kicking it back over to Akash at Adobe Summit in Vegas.
I'm here with Rachel Thornton, CMO of Adobe Enterprise. Rachel, welcome back to TITV. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Well, we spoke about 6 months ago at
Yes.
Adobe Max.
Yes.
Now we're here at Adobe Summit.
Yes.
Walk me through some of the releases that you guys are making this week here on the ground.
Yeah. First, I'm super excited that you guys are here at Summit. This is a big event for us. It's 14,000 people. We're kicking it off day one today. And I think it's a really interesting time for marketers. When creative teams think about just all of the things that are happening, whether it's around brand discovery and the rise of LLM search, if it's around content and how do I make enough content to sort of satisfy consumer demands for content that feels personalized, and then building the right experience across a lot of different touch points. I think marketers are hungry to figure out, okay, how do I combine creativity, marketing, and AI to bring this to life? That, I think, understanding that context is what makes it exciting. At least I'm very excited about our Adobe CX Enterprise announcement. When we think about customer experience orchestration, like I talked about a minute ago, like how do you orchestrate experiences, content, journeys across a lot of different surfaces and places where customers are, Adobe CX Enterprise is that purpose-built solution to make that happen, to bring that to life for marketers.
So I'm a marketer and I have to figure out how am I going to get all this content out there?
Right.
How can AI help me do that?
Exactly. And that's what Adobe CX Enterprise is. So how do you take the data that you have on customers? How do you take the journey orchestration you want to do? And then how do you create content at scale across so many different channels now so that you really are delivering an experience that it feels like it's speaking to you directly? And then I think with looking at the importance of amplifying your marketing team, your creative team, we've talked about agents. Everyone's talking about those purpose-built agents. But with Adobe CX Coworker, which is the other thing we're going to talk about, it's lots of things, but this is a way to say, all right, I'm as a marketer, I now can orchestrate across my team members, across my agents. I can define goals. CX Coworker can execute on those goals. I think that is a great way for now marketers to be able to take a step back and say, hey, there's some signals I want to take in from my customers, from my industry, from my environment. And if those signals happen, no matter when they happen, as long as I have my coworker teammate who can say, okay, great, that competitive signal came in from a channel, or I'm selling beauty products and that beauty product has popped because of an influencer, coworker can say, hey, let's respond to that. Let's build a campaign. Let's get it out there.
So coworker, is it like a marketing assistant that
think about it like that.
Reads the results of all these campaigns that you put out there and then comes to you and says, hey, just so you know, your social campaigns are performing better. You should do X,
let's do some more social campaigns. And now the marketer is in this great position of like, hey, as I look across my team, how do I get my marketers who can build content, build experiences, but how do I amplify that team, have them move faster, have them be more agile? And I think Coworker is that great example of how do you have your AI coworker is like, hey, here's how we're helping you build campaigns. Here's how we're going to make sure that if this thing happened, we can build the right campaign or the right experience around it. And then the marketer can look at it and say, yes, that looks great. Let's go. Or maybe that's not meeting the mark on the beauty product I did want to position. Let's see if we can redo it. So I think that's exciting for Coworker. And then I think the other thing that's really exciting is Adobe Brand Intelligence. If you think about the rise of all of this content that marketers have to create, you absolutely have to make sure it's on brand, right? If you want to make sure it's governed, it's compliant, it's brand ready, and that you can scale those brand guidelines across assets, across teams, Adobe Brand Intelligence helps you do that without having any sort of brand drift. Like I made 50 different assets or 5,000 different assets, but maybe the first one looked great, the last one didn't. Adobe Brand Intelligence.
Consistent.
Exactly. It's consistent. There's no brand drift. It has all of your guidelines, embedded in it, and all of your designers, all of your marketers can make content, make it faithfully, deliver that brand experience faithfully.
So, look, the idea of using an assistant or even an agent to help read what's effective on the marketer's end, I mean, that's one way that marketers could be using AI. The other way that I want to get your take on here is this idea that you are now not just marketing to people, but now we have a sea of agents crawling the internet.
Yes.
And so if I am a retailer and I've put these advertisements out there, look, people might see them, but really now there's the agents that have to read the internet. And so how do you advise chief marketing officers to think about that? I mean, how are you helping customers show up better to agents right now?
I think about it as an audience. It's a conversation my team and we've been having a lot over the last several months. It's like, if you think about the audiences a marketer has to go after, agents become an audience, right? So you have to think, I'll give you a good example. In brand discovery, if you see the rise of people looking for information using ChatGPT, Perplexity, Gemini, you have to not only think about, all right, what are the humans doing? What are my customers doing? But what are the agents doing that are basically reading the information I have, making sure that agents are just as educated on what you're providing so that you do show up well in LLMs. But when you begin to sort of think about it as this is an audience. So like any audience, how do I need to think about educating them, engaging them, making sure I have the right content, making sure I've built the right experiences? It just, in this day and age, makes sure your brand shows up better, right? Your offerings show up better. And I think any marketer, who's been dealing with audiences for their whole career, they're going to get that. They're going to say, great, if this is an audience, how do I think about educating, training that audience?
So what's the answer to that question? Then how do you show up better to agents? If bots, essentially.
Right, exactly. So if you go back a couple of years, I think people would have said, I have my website's for people. I don't want to have bots scraping my website. That maybe wouldn't be a good thing. But now it's like, no, you have to think about it as, this is the website I want to make sure my customers are seeing, and this is the website and the content really that I want to make sure agents are seeing. So how are you making that machine readable? How are you making that agent readable so that that content, that information that you want to show up is showing up, right? And I think if I look at products like Adobe LLM Optimizer, that's what we're helping you do, is understand what is the experience that you want to build for humans? Again, if you come to your website, or what is the experience you want to build for agents to make sure that you show up well as agents consume that information, and then it gets ingested and trained from models.
I want to ask you about AI adoption broadly speaking. Are you seeing any resistance at all to people adopting AI? This idea that I don't know, I kind of like my job. Why would I want a bot to do it for me?
Mm-hmm.
Is there any fear in the enterprises that you work with of adopting these tools?
I think, if you think about sort of ground zero for a lot of this disruption, Silicon Valley, and then you think about the West Coast, and then as you move sort of in concentric circles outwards, there's going to be varying levels of adoption, varying levels of people embracing it. There's no CMO I'm talking to that is like, okay, this isn't a thing. Every CMO is like, yes, I understand this disruption across sort of the key marketing work streams in my world. So whether it's brand discoverability, whether it's content, whether it's customer experiences. So now help me figure out how to do it. And then I think when we're talking to teams, the hunger, the thing that we're getting a lot of requests for is, what do I need to know? Like, what's my primer on everything I need to know about thinking about marketing and the intersection of marketing and AI? So I think it has to do, to me, with there's a velocity of adoption depending on, the industry, the brand, the company. But everybody realizes, hey, this is something I have to understand that's happening, but now understand, more importantly, how to navigate it, right? How do I make sure I'm not just bolting things on or not really thinking end-to-end about my brand experience and my customer experience? How am I really thinking about embedding AI into all of my work streams? So I think there is definitely that hunger to learn and to navigate it and to make sure that you're navigating successfully these shifts. But I think the adoption may vary depending on industry, like I said, industry, brand, where you are, et cetera. So I think that's where we're helping customers, is sort of figuring out, hey, how do we help educate you on where you are? And then how can we help you do more?
I mentioned at the start of the conversation, we spoke 6 months ago at Adobe Max. And look, we're at a pace of innovation right now where a month feels like a year. And so a lot has changed in the last 6 months. What do you think has changed about the AI conversation in the last 6 months that you think is emblematic of the way you think people are going to be talking about it from here on in?
It's not just the pace of change. I think it is understanding how this change and the paradigm shifts across things, how you have to think about them, how you have to implement them. I also think there's this, and I've talked about this before, it gives you a chance, I think, to experiment more, and that experimentation becomes important so you can really figure out what will work for you, for your brand, for your offerings, for your customer base. And so I think there'll be more agility than I think marketers have had in a while. I think the speed at which you can do things, create things, will give you the ability to experiment more. But I also think there is this concept of how do you think about agents as an audience? Not only, an audience you're talking to, but even internally, as there's lots of conversations, especially between, I think, CMOs and CIOs about who are the tech vendors we're working with, what's our agent strategy, how would we have agents internally, how do we orchestrate internal agents? I think there's a lot still to learn about how are you doing that training, how are you doing that skilling, if you want to say, you want to think about that for agents. How do you want them to show up? I think that's an interesting conversation now.
And how do you do? I mean, this is a question that I've started to ask myself: is how do I be on the forefront of these tools? It's a question I'm sure you're thinking about as well.
Yes.
How do we make our own people on the forefront of these tools? You hear companies sending their engineers back to coding boot camp, right?
Yep.
It's like relearning things. How do you think about upskilling your own people in this environment?
Like I said, I definitely think the skilling, the training, just the education in general, right? Like I think of it as just how do I learn about what's going on in the industry? And this is what, as a team we're doing all the time. We love you guys as a source of information. But like, how am I learning? How am I keeping abreast of what's happening? But more importantly, how am I kind of changing the paradigm I've had for how things happen and how we now work in this world of people and agents? Like we've been on our team, we've been experimenting with, okay, great. We're not just having purpose-built agents who maybe build us an audience. We're actually having teams say, hey, we needed to understand, for example, content operations. Well, we built an agent for that. We built a conversational UI for that. And I think that gives everyone a chance to get hands-on with not only building, but using these tools and figuring out what's the right way to use them. We're actually doing a fun session here where we will have people come in, customize agents, Adobe agents, and then have them complete problems like, hey, create a campaign artifact. And it's interesting to see how that works, see how agents talk to each other, how agents, work together to solve a task. So I think it's examples like that and, experiences like that where marketers are really learning. And I think leaning into that is going to be, that's what I think is going to be the thing that happens over the next year or so is really getting deep with if this is a new audience, if these are new, supporting cast for the marketers, how do we get them educated and trained up and working, with the marketers to achieve a task?
Great. Well, Rachel, I want to thank you for having us here. That is Rachel Thornton from Adobe here on TITV. I'm joined now by Amit Ahuja, SVP of Customer Experience Orchestration Platform and Products at Adobe. Amit, welcome to TITV. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for, it's awesome. And thanks for coming to the show and really appreciate it.
So you've got a lot going on in your portfolio. Walk us through your role at the company very briefly.
Yeah. So I've been with the company about 21 years. So I've been here for quite a few cycles of it, which has been amazing. I will not bore you with what I did during that most time, but for the last 6 years, I'm responsible for, think about it as product management and product marketing for the customer experience orchestration part of the business. That's my role.
So the thing that I want to dive deeper into specifically with you is we've got these partnerships that you guys are announcing with 30 plus different partners. These are big tech companies. These are not small startups in many cases. What are these partnerships? What do you hope to achieve with them? What is actually happening on the ground? Walk us through it.
Yeah, it's interesting. First of all, you and I were chatting a little bit. We've done Summit many years. The concept of these big ecosystems is not new. So let me start there, and I'll tell you why this year I think is a little bit different. But even if you rewind back to many summits ago, I think one of the things I'm super proud about, we've always believed in this kind of open ecosystem approach. And it's just reality, right? I've always said this, that when I go to the majority of our enterprise customers, there is no such thing as only Adobe, right? So it's in the customer's best interest and our best interest to make sure that whatever technology we're providing, it works right with the rest of what I call the ecosystem. And traditionally, the way we thought about the ecosystem has largely been around a few big areas. One is what we call ISVs, which are other big tech players, and we've spent years and years developing integrations, reference architectures, such that if a customer says, hey, I want to use Adobe over here, I want to use System X over here, we have that integration in those playbooks, right? So that's one. The second area we spent many years around the agency landscape, right? A lot of the agencies use our technology to help power their offering, right? And we partner with them as it relates to going to these customers and now giving them an offering. And the third area has been the system integrators, right? So whether it's the Accentures, Deloitte, there's many of these that we work very closely with, and we have amazing partnerships as it relates to, look, once our technology is there, how do you go actually make it successful on behalf of the client? So that's been true, I would say, pretty much every summit. And I know the number 30 is coming up because it refers to some of the newer ones, but we have thousands of companies in this ecosystem, right?
What are the ones you're announcing this week?
Yeah,
You've got big names.
So I'll get to that, exactly. So the new part, a little bit, and where the attention is this year more than ever, is a lot around the AI part, right? And understandably, I think everybody's walking into the summit saying, hey, AI is top of mind. What does it mean? What does it mean for me? And so the ecosystem, you're exactly right. So some of the ones we're really excited about from that domain is, number one, we're starting to see more and more customers saying, hey, Adobe, I use you to standardize all my customer experience, but now I've got a bunch of people, whether it's the IT organization or even practitioners, who are standardizing on Claude, who are standardizing on ChatGPT Enterprise, or standardizing on Copilot Cowork, or standardizing on whichever main AI platform. One of the biggest things we're sending the message of today, and we've built out, is you can access our technology through any of these environments. And that's really important right now because I think a lot of these customers are trying to figure this out and say, okay, you are my system of record for everything CX. You have all my workflows, you have my system of truth, you have all my context. How do I now bring this into people who are using these other AI tools such that the investment is paid off that way too? So that's kind of the new category that's emerged. Although it's really a build on, like, we've been working with Microsoft for years, we've been working with Google for years, but now we're starting to see a lot more interest around how do we expand this into these new AI services.
So I just want to get a little tactical here.
Yeah.
So, because we've got people who may not be as familiar with Adobe's suite of products. And so these partnerships with these big tech companies, with Microsoft, with the AI labs, for example, are these just product level integrations where it's that this Adobe product works and can communicate with a Microsoft tool? Is that what a partnership means here? Or is there actually money changing hands? Are you paying any of these partners? Are they paying you?
Let's first of all, I appreciate the everything sounds very high level until you ask questions like that. So genuinely, I appreciate you asking that. Let me give you an example, right? As if I break down our stack, right? And the way I always think about technology and the way I think about the products we build is across the stack. These partnerships, although they come across as, hey, it's one logo, another logo, are actually very multifaceted. So if I break it down, I say, okay, let's define the software stack. Let's start at the top. People log into applications and what we call the front door, right? The user experience. What we are saying today is that if you are using Claude, if you are using ChatGPT, if you're using Google Enterprise, and you'll actually, I don't know if you'll be able to attend the keynote, you will see a demo of that with Copilot. You can now access our technology directly through that UI. So in other words, and again, the follow-up tactical question would be like, well, great, so what? Let me give you an example. Today, a bunch of marketers log into Microsoft Word, right? Mm-hmm. Where do you create a campaign brief? Well, they're like, hey, I want to go write a bunch of stuff. So they go to Microsoft Word. Historically, they would say, okay, I want to create this campaign brief. Now, where do I start? And wait, what campaign did I already run? What worked? What didn't work? What concept should I be using? Guess where all that information is? It's in Adobe. So why wouldn't I surface it through Copilot directly in Word, right? So that all that information is now showing up there and marketers are thrilled, right? They're like, hey, I don't have to switch 15 different systems. And you're actually using the technology to populate what I need at that time, right? So think about one layer of the stack as this front door, okay? So these partnerships are around, hey, if you want to standardize and access us through that, you can. If you want to come in through another, what I call front door, you can do that too. Keep going down the stack. You have a whole level of intelligence and models. We work with a lot of these people around their model layer. We have our own models, they build models, and we can incorporate all these different models depending on what people are doing, right? Take another level down the stack. Our software runs on different hyperscaler environments. We partner with them around the hyperscaler environment. So my point is, like, it's sometimes easy to see one logo. What we've done is truly think about at every layer of the stack, what is the right thing for the customer? How do we partner with these people? And these relationships are absolutely multifaceted, to answer your question, as it relates to technology, as it relates to go-to-market. All of that is part of this.
And multifaceted also in terms of, are the companies paying each other here?
Yeah,
or is it just a handshake saying, we'll work with your product?
Yeah, I mean, we have years of history of using different parts of platforms, whether it's hyperscalers, et cetera. They have years of history of standardizing on our technology, right, as it relates to some of their use cases. So there's, like, again, it's hard to capsule it, but every part of the stack has this kind of multifaceted relationship.
I want to ask you about this, the fate of SEO. you know?
Yeah.
What is the fate of SEO in your opinion? Because we're talking about it this week. There's now how you show up in chatbots. There's how the agents are reading your content on the internet. Are we going to care about SEO 5 years from now?
Yeah. So let's take I appreciate what you said earlier about, for the listeners that aren't super deep on this, let's take just a micro step back. The notion of what brands have had to do to be discovered is always evolving, okay? So, I mean, if you really want to rewind the clock, I'm guessing, and again, I'm going to date myself, but way back in the day, you put ads in a newspaper, right? That person clipped out the newspaper or whatever, read the newspaper, and went to their local store, and they got greeted by a local store.
That's when you started.
That's when I started at Adobe, right, before there were even computers. Thank you. So then
you said it, not me. Okay.
Then there's digital, right? And digital came around and said, hey, like, this whole world is changing, right? You need a website, you need a mobile app, and this notion of search engine marketing came out, right? With Google and all these other tools came out. It's like, oh my God, people are expressing intent in these places. I need to be seen in these environments, right? Now, in the last couple of years, you're seeing this whole evolution of new platforms, right? And you're a consumer, I'm a consumer. I tend to use Perplexity a lot. I use ChatGPT a lot. And I'm now going to these environments to learn and discover or automate. I'm actually doing a lot of things in these environments. A brand fundamentally has to now understand, hey, as this evolves, how do I reach these folks as well? I don't think it's a notion of, oh, all that other stuff is gone. It is truly incremental to now how do I address, and there's incredible synergy between, hey, what I do from an SEO point of view, right? And now how do I reach these new environments? And to our strategy, right, which I'm very excited, it's called Brand Visibility, is the portfolio that we do in this domain. We've announced a whole bunch of new products there. One is called LM Optimizer. It's getting a lot of traction around helping brands answer this. But the thing I always tell people, I think where Adobe is uniquely positioned, and hopefully this comes across as you listen to Summit. Yes, we want to provide you with the analytics and the data to understand, oh, okay, I'm seeing that for my brand A or B, and again, most of our customers have multiple brands. I'm seeing that we are not getting cited or not getting referenced on ChatGPT. And to go fix this, you need to go update your content on Reddit, whatever it might be, right? There's a whole thing. That just showing the analytics is interesting, but actually providing this closed loop automation cycle is where the world is going. And to do that, right, you have to have this analytic capabilities, you have to have the content generation capabilities, you have to have the CMS and telemetry capabilities. That's what we're bringing together, right? The notion of that is what we call brand visibility. Some people call it this experience flywheel concept, which basically means what's the signal? Like, what am I hearing and what's the discovery looking like? What do I need to go generate, whether that's on-site or off-site? And then fundamentally, how do I continue to optimize that loop? The reality is that even back to your point about SEO, what the bots were, like doing kind of what I call them basically notification bots back in the day for search, these agents are completely different, right? Now you have personal agents being built on OpenClaw. They're coming to your website. These personal agents are going to start making decisions. So now every brand is sitting there saying, yes, I need to provide information, but oh God, I got these personal agents showing up. They're making decisions in sub-seconds. So your content better be agent optimized and better be ready in sub-seconds for that agent to say, oh, I'm going to go automate this. I'm going to go buy this. That whole world is completely evolving. And we're very fortunate that we've been building on what we call Adobe Experience Manager, which is our foundation for content, into this world of brand visibility, and really excited about that.
Let me ask you one last question here.
Please.
You know, we cover a lot of startups here on the show. We also cover all the big tech companies that are all sort of circling around a similar area of products in terms of agents. How do you stand out? How do you differentiate yourself?
I mean, first of all, so I told you earlier, I'm responsible for product, and I have a lot of respect for the startups. I have a lot of respect for the big tech companies. I think everybody's coming at it from, their point of view, which I think is absolutely great. And I think it's great for the industry. I think it's great for the customers, et cetera. So I think that's kind of part number one. Part number two is this is not a new phenomenon, right? If we were sitting here having this conversation 15 years ago, we kind of around the time we started building this category called digital marketing, we would have the same conversation. I would have told you at that point, hey, venture funding there's 50 companies in every little space that we compete. Actually, it's probably way more than 50. And if anybody ever wants to see that, whoever's listening, go to these tools like Lumascape, or there's all these different Chief Martech. This has been covered for years, how many startups and all that. Where we differentiate truly from the ground up is I think we have truly led the charge around what are these categories and what are the tools required to fully execute on it. So if you rewind back to the beginning, we really defined what is digital marketing. Then about 6 or 7 years later, we defined what is customer experience management, a broadening of that as it relates to tools and capability. Last year at Summit, we came out and we said, hey, now we're defining a new category. We call it customer experience orchestration. We've always taken the lead on that, but more importantly, I think we've been ahead on thinking about what are these tools that need to be connected to actually drive this value. And I never take away from the startup who's focusing on one area. There's a lot of great tech there. I think there's other big companies doing amazing things, but I think our unique thing is we're trusted by a lot of customers for this. B, they've used us for years and have built it up. And C, the reality of where we sit today is that all these companies are hearing about AI, AI, AI. If you're a CIO, you're a CMO, you are sitting there getting inundated with every company in the world coming and saying AI, AI, and you walk out of a meeting, you're like, I don't know what is going on. Adobe comes in as a strategic partner, and most importantly, we know how to make AI work in the enterprise context. So now everything you're trying to do from a CX point of view, you can do that with Adobe, which I think is truly differentiated. And that's respecting your brand, that's respecting your controls, that's respecting compliance. A lot of the stuff that people don't talk about. To make this work in enterprise, that is what you need.
Great. Well, Amit, I want to thank you for coming on. That
Pleasure.
is Amit Ahuja from Adobe here on TITV. I'm joined now by Jason Cherok, VP of Product Design and Analytics at Dick's Sporting Goods, which is a client of Adobe. Jason, welcome to TITV. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Tell me a little bit about your role at Dick's Sporting Goods.
Yeah, so I, as you mentioned, lead product design and analytics. It's across the enterprise. So we have really three big areas. Our athlete, which is really our and what we call our consumer. So all things, marketing, e-com, et cetera. On our teammate side, which is really merchandising, supply chain, those types of things. And our foundation, which is our data and AI platform, infrastructure, all those things. So I get to play across the space and I have a lot of fun doing it.
Now, I have to ask you, because I was looking forward to this conversation. A couple months ago on X, I saw that the top 4 apps on the App Store, you had the 3 big AI chatbot apps, and then Dick's Sporting Goods was right there at number 4. And look, you see a lot of stuff on the internet, so I just want to make sure. I mean, that was true, right? Dick's Sporting Goods was the number 4 app on the App Store.
It is indeed true. Yes, we got a lot of buzz from that for sure. We take a lot of pride in our app. It really comes down to how we think about our overall athlete experience. So we always think app first, at everything from how you're engaging in our loyalty program, things you can do inside of the store with your app, and then just generally how we try to keep you engaged and make sure we meet your goals. So take a lot of pride, and we're very excited about that performance.
So, look, I think, we can talk a little later about why the app was so popular then. But what I am interested in asking you about is how AI is embedded, not just into the app, but into the company at large. Tell me a little bit about some of the ways in which you're using the technology.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, AI is not a new thing, right? It's been around for a long time. So we spent a long time already really investing and putting time into our data and AI platform to begin with. So a lot of that is understanding in our entire ecosystem the athlete, right? So we have everything from, Game Changer, which helps us understand your journey throughout youth sports. We have everything in our stores and how you're engaging. And so it comes down to really having an integrated, holistic view of the athlete. So that's one. 2 is then the ability to actually engage them. So in order to personalize at scale and be part of your end-to-end journey, you really can only do that with AI, not only in the experiences you're creating, but even operationally, how we can serve that experience. So we use AI in pretty much all things, and we're doubling down on it now as it continues to evolve and with the use of agents.
So let's get a little tactical here. I mean, so I'm an athlete, a customer, I guess, of Dick's Sporting Goods. I mean, when I log onto the website or if I'm using the app, I mean, one way that I know that I can interact with AI is using chatbots. Now we have this era of agents. Help me understand the line between what is a chatbot to you, what is an agent to you, are the agents actually deciding for me what I'm going to purchase? Just walk me through it on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, agents, if you think about agentic commerce holistically, right? Really the difference is, one, agents can reason. And so they can actually help, to your point, make recommendations, understand more, and really research more and more quickly than a human could, right? So that's one thing. But I think the other is, as it continues to evolve in the industry, there's going to be new channels and new access points to where athletes are. And so one, we have to make sure we always meet the athlete where they are and get them what they need and help them meet their goals. But the other is ultimately how we create a differentiated experience within Dick's Sporting Goods. So as you come to our platform, the ability to use agents and engage conversationally is really something we can do in a differentiated way because of a few reasons. One, we do have the breadth and depth of our product catalog, firstly. Second is our expertise in the culture of sport and how to play sports. And so that's really uniquely Dick's. And then our athlete profile, everything we know from not just purchase behavior, but really how you're engaging with us, but also how you're engaging in sport. And so when we provide all that, we can create a truly differentiated experience through the use of agents.
And so, once again, for people who might not be as familiar with the Dick's Sporting Goods platform, the website, I mean, so when you say customers are using an agent, is this like an assistant that I see on my account? How
Right.
does it actually work?
Yeah, that really is our goal. So if you think about, today, like many others, there is a chatbot capability. Usually that has to do with things like customer service and those types of things. And those have been around for a long time. What we are hoping to do ultimately is create a very seamless conversational experience that really is across our entire ecosystem. So imagine, to your point, yes, you have a personal assistant, but can be, all things Dix. And so we're not there yet, but that is the ultimate goal, and to make it deeply personalized to you. So that's what will make it different from many other places you might be using an agent.
So agents are one thing that you're working towards. The other area that we've been exploring in our coverage here at The Information is how brands get their name out there in this new ecosystem of chatbots, agents, et cetera. I mean, search was the way that people learned how to do it. You certainly had social media advertising. Now you have questions about how do I get my name to show up better in the chatbot results? How do I even think about advertising in the chatbots? Walk me through the considerations that you're making there in terms of this new era of discovery.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing that explode, right? So there's the SEO, GEO, AEO. It's kind of, at the end of the day, what it comes down to is with agentic commerce and agents, it really is using a large language model, and how that, manifests inside of an experience requires a whole different set of data. And so a lot of that comes down to, how are you enriching in the breadth and depth of your product information? What else are you providing inside of there to give enough context to the LLM to serve you up? And so I think there's not only
what's the answer to that? Well, what else do you provide then to make sure that it shows up better in the LLM?
As much as you can, right? So I mean, large language models are just that, right? They're looking for patterns. They're trying to understand. And so it's a very different experience from just some of the romance copy you might put on a website that might help you, get exposed for what an athlete is searching for. Traditionally, you actually have to do both now. So how do you make sure you have that enriched experience for, call it the human, but then also when an agent is coming in, providing more depth inside of that knowledge so that it can actually create a recommendation.
So it's just more content at the end of the day.
It's basically more content at the end of the day.
So how much are you using AI to produce that content then?
Yeah, I think and again, that's been around for a while too, if you think about it, right? So when we think about like anything from creative assets to anything else, there's even product information. Like there are ways that you can auto tag or help enrich those data sets rather than someone manually doing that, which unfortunately still is true on some levels, right? Somebody has to do that work, but AI can help enrich that. And so that's been around for a while. But I do think that what we're trying to do is actually streamline that end to end. So when we think about AI, even in our content supply chain, if you will, we're using that throughout our operations. And so there's just more and more capabilities evolving that we always jump in head first and really try to use it to the best we can.
Where are you seeing return on investment as you make these investments in AI in your business?
A big part of it really is speed to market. And so, if we think about, even before we talk about athletes, which to us is, everything from a weekend warrior to someone with kids and everything else, it really is, that's a lot of people with a lot of touch points at scale. And so when you have millions and millions of athletes and you have millions and millions, if not billions of touch points over the course of their journey, the only way to do that is through AI. And so we use that in a lot of our operations really to be able to meet them where they are.
Great. Well, Jason, I want to thank you for joining us on TITV. It's great to have you here.
Thank you very much.
I'm here with Taylor Schreiner, Senior Director and Head of Adobe Digital Insights. Taylor, welcome to TITV. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Akash. Appreciate your time.
So the way that I understand your role at Adobe is you are in charge of a lot of the data that comes out of the company. Is that right?
Yeah, I have a really exciting role running a team called Adobe Digital Insights, and we provide industry-leading insights and perspective on everything from the digital economy to how AI is transforming customer experiences to creativity and generative AI, all across the board of what Adobe touches.
And so because you're the data guy, I want to ask you some questions about, the macro state of play in AI. And, the first topic I want to ask you about is whether or not people are using agents, because I know they're out there. I know companies are selling them, but here at the information, I mean, this is a question we've tried to get to the heart at is, are people actually using these things?
Our data absolutely demonstrates yes. So we're seeing consumers use AI in general about 5 times as much as they did even a year ago. But what's really interesting about that is not just the adoption rate, but the trust that they're showing in AI. So when they show up from AI, they're spending about 25% more in commerce than they had been if they were coming from another source. And because of that trust, they're starting to now transact in chatbots, in the brand interactions on the webpage, and see that as the way that they want to interact with the brands that they want to transact with.
So that's really interesting. So people actually, they are shopping with these chatbots. I mean, this is happening.
Absolutely. In increasing numbers, obviously, like anything in AI, yesterday it was your neighbor and tomorrow it's everybody on your block. It's happening at an incredibly rapidly increasing rate. But I think it's fundamentally based on the trust that consumers are seeing in AI. And because of that trust, they're willing to make these transactions.
Now, tell me a little bit about, in terms of the usage, there's also the investment that companies have to make in these tools. I'm curious where you see customers getting the most ROI from these tools. Is this cost savings? Is it higher revenue? Where is this all coming from?
Well, one of the clear sources in the data is just making your web page visible through optimization for LLMs and AI. So for instance, we see the companies that are leaning into AI are the top 10% of fastest growing companies in our data set. So if you're a top 10% fastest growing company in our data set, you're getting fully a third more of your traffic from AI than anybody else in the data set. And that's because you're leaning into optimization for Gen AI exposure. You're leaning into LLM visibility, and you're using the agents that get those things done.
So walk us through some of the data here. I mean, do you guys, you collect so much data. I mean, are there any stats that really jump out to you about the ways in which these agents are being used, the cost savings, the traffic? I mean, what numbers should we be paying attention to here on our end?
Well, I think one of the things that comes out today at Summit from Oxford Economics that I can't take credit for, but they did an amazing job, is that maybe an eighth or a sixth of companies have really deployed agentic AI across the board. But within the next 12 to 18 months, everybody expects that number to be massively higher, to accelerate rapidly. And not only that, to transform the way that companies do business. So not just accelerate it, but change the way that work is done, because the AI is now living on top of the governance, data, and operations of the business and able to affect a bigger impact on the operation.
Now, one of the other questions we've been asking here on our show is, okay, so people are using agents. They might be playing with them. They might be piloting them, experimenting with them. Is it durable, right? Will it last? You just mentioned, you said the proportion of people that use this technology is set to increase. But I'm wondering about the people who are using the tools.
Sure.
Will they continue using it? I wonder if your data tells you anything about that.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think from across the board, the most interesting thing about the agentic transformation right now is how human it really is. So if you are an individual contributor who used to be fingers on keyboard, you're now going to be running a swarm of agents that get more done for you. If you were the CMO who didn't, talk to the CTO on a regular basis, you guys are now joined at the hip. And if you're a customer or a consumer whose interaction with the brand had been through, say, search or navigation, you're now operating through your own AI agents and the brand's AI agents to get work done. And it's when the human interactions change, when the organizations change, when the consumers change their behaviors, that's what I think creates durability across the board.
And how are those human interactions changing? What is changing about it that you're seeing?
Well, on the consumer side, we're seeing, as I said, increasing trust in AI. So one thing that really stuck out to me is that if you buy something with an AI agent, you're actually 68% less likely to return it, which is sort of an odd stat. But that's because you have built trust into the interaction with the AI in the selection process of the item that you've purchased, and you believe that it's the right one and the one that best fits your needs. Or similarly, in finance, we're seeing 80+% of people wanting to get financial advice from AI agents and act on that advice. And so it's that level of trust that transforms your life. You're no longer going store to store. You're trusting the agent. You're no longer talking to your brother-in-law about where you should put your money. You're trusting the agent. And I think that's what is going to be the durable transition in our economy.
Great. Well, Taylor, I want to thank you for coming on. That is Taylor Schreiner from Adobe here on TITV. That does it for today's show. A reminder, you can catch us back in our New York City studio tomorrow. We are on this stream Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. And if you can't make it then, episodes are available on theinformation.com, on our YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to follow us on X, on social media, on Instagram, on TikTok. I am already excited for our next show. Have a great rest of your Tuesday.